How's it going, everyone? In this video, I'm going to be going over 5 tips for handling difficult conversations with loved ones. Now, the reason I say with loved ones specifically is because there are certain things that you're going to want to do to make sure that you are able to maintain or bolster the relationship regardless of the direction the conversation is going in. So, this is going to be a little bit different than handling heated conversations with someone that you don't care about or don't know or that you don't really have a relationship with, because most of this is going to focus on saving the relationship or maintaining the relationship while getting through some of these harder conversations. Now, the number one thing that needs to happen, or the number one problem that arises during difficult conversations, is emotions bubble up and become intense and take over the conversation in a way that you're not going to get the outcomes that you're actually looking for. So, our overarching goal is to keep emotions at a regulated level, and that's not to say that emotions are bad or there's anything wrong with them, but they can make it hard to think clearly, to have a difficult conversation and sort of hash out some of the important details. So it's going to matter how we approach things and the state of mind that we're in as the conversation develops. Now, there's basically 2 parts to this, as there is with any conversation, and focusing again on that emotional piece, we're going to both need to make sure we regulate our emotions and make sure that we create space for the other person to either express their emotions and get to a more clear, level-headed place, or to allow them to discuss their thoughts and feelings in a way that doesn't heighten their emotions to the point that they get out of control and you're no longer in a clear, calm place for actually having this difficult conversation. The first tip, and this is going to seem really cliche and simple, but is to go into the conversation leaning towards the side of listening, right? Have in your mind an approach that you are going to listen much more than you talk, that you're going to be listening a lot of the time, and that you're going to have to control your impulse to say things at certain moments in the name of allowing the person you're speaking with to have enough space to actually say what it is that they want to say. So that's really, really important. If you can't help but interrupt someone, that is a clear red flag that you are in an emotional state. So that's the first thing. Get your mindset right. Go into it knowing that you're going to be listening a lot of the time. Now, the second piece that is extremely important is that you validate first and then discuss the content. And when I say validate first, basically what that means is you need to acknowledge the pieces of the relationship outside of the discussion to make sure that the person you're talking with feels valued, feels heard, feels important. Because, as I was mentioning before, since this is a relationship we want to keep and maintain, we need to highlight those things so that we don't get derailed emotionally. One of the best ways to keep things on track is to make sure that you provide the frame around the conversation and show that it's just one small piece of the relationship so that things don't get out of hand. So when you validate, basically what I'm saying is things like you need to validate the person, basically saying things like, okay, I understand that your experience, or okay, I understand you're feeling frustrated, I understand, etc., right? Whatever way, you don't have to say the words I understand, but whatever way that you can communicate, okay, you are having an experience, or you have an opinion, or you feel a certain way, and that's completely valid. That doesn't mean you have to agree, that just means that you have to make enough space to say, okay, I understand this is where you're coming from, I understand this is your experience, or whatever else, and that is a completely valid place to come from. Now, the reason we need to do this is because if you don't validate the person's experience, they may not end up feeling heard, and that's when emotions start to arise, and that complicates things, right? It makes it harder to think clearly and starts escalating. So you have to make it very, very clear that you're listening, that you respect them, that you validate them as a person, their ideas, the things that they want to talk about. If you undermine them, you're going to cause problems. So, for example, if someone says, I have this opinion on this, how this political thing should go. You say, that's stupid. That is the opposite of validating, right? What you need to say is, that's an interesting perspective. I hear where you're coming from. Or, that's an interesting perspective. Could you explain more to me? And this goes back to the listening piece, right? You need to be ready to really fully dig in and listen if you want to make sure that you can keep the conversation at an even emotional kill, or in the realm of emotions that are, it's not overwhelming the conversation, clearing up your mind so that you can actually talk about the things that are important and that you want. The third tip is, if things become emotional, you have to reduce the emotional intensity before you go back to talking about details and solving the situation. I don't know if you've had this experience before, but there have been many times where I'm having an argument with someone, it gets heated emotionally, and suddenly we're arguing kind of in circles, or we're saying things that don't really relate to the last point, right? Just kind of trying to score points and say like, well, you did this thing and that was stupid, so even though it has nothing to do with what the conversation was about. If things start escalating, you have to reduce your emotional intensity or their emotional intensity or both before you're going to be able to continue having a productive conversation. You cannot skip this step. You cannot just move past this and think that with two people talking past each other, you're going to ever come to any sort of solution or conclusion that's useful in any way. You have to get both people at a level that they're willing to have an actual conversation. Fourth, this tip is basically do not get sucked into your own emotions and use tools to reduce your emotional state when you feel yourself kind of getting pulled away. Now, for me personally, I often get pulled into anger if I stay in conversations too long. And two of the most useful tools you can use are boundaries and space, right? So by space, most often that means, hey, I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, I'm feeling frustrated, whatever else. Can we table this conversation for 30 minutes so I can get myself composed, come back and have a real conversation? Can I table this till tomorrow, till I get composed? We can have a real conversation, right? One of the ways is creating space. Another thing that you can do is set boundaries around the type of conversation you'd like to have. So, for example, if you are having a conversation with someone and they start yelling, a lot of people are going to get emotionally worked up in some way. They're going to withdraw and feel really sad. They're going to react the same way and start getting angry. They're going to get frustrated, whatever else. High emotional displays tend to bring out other emotions from other people. So if you feel yourself kind of getting drawn into that, sucked into this higher emotional state, another thing you can do is set boundaries and say, I am not willing to have this conversation while one of us is yelling. And it can be hard to end the conversation at that point, right? Hey, I mentioned that I don't want to have this conversation while someone's yelling. I'm going to withdraw until you feel like you can have this conversation with me without yelling. It's not going to be easy and it's not going to be natural for a lot of people, but getting sucked into this point, again, where both people are highly emotional and can't think straight and are just arguing about something, is not likely to lead to any useful sort of solution. So it is more useful to kind of do this withdrawal and set these boundaries because it forces space to be created. It forces some of the emotional buildup to have a release valve, right? When there's no one to continually feed the emotion back and forth off of, a lot of time it will die down. So I've used this before and come back to the conversation and the other person was a lot more calm because I wasn't there basically to keep hyping things up, to keep intensifying. Again, can be really difficult, but it's absolutely essential if you want to get a good outcome. So again, going back to kind of the overall point, find tools and ways that you have full control over to reduce your emotional state so that you don't get hijacked and you are not in a place where you're thinking unclearly and saying things that you don't mean and getting confused and whatnot. The last tip that I have, the fifth one, is to make your goals and aspirations for the conversation clear. And by that I mean every once in a while, step back and make sure that you're communicating what it is you want to get out of the conversation. If you're coming in with the intention of, hey, I just want to make sure that I'm right and I want to be right, that's not going to come across well. And that's what happens a lot of times when you get into the details and just start butting heads. But if you step back a little bit and say, hey, I want to make sure we come up with a solution that's going to work for both of us that makes us both feel respected or something like that. As you go back and forth and take occasional steps back to look at this bigger picture, you can make sure that you are focused on the correct things, right? It's really easy to get bogged down in the details and start fighting over details that don't really matter, that neither of you really care about. So keep taking those steps back to say, hey, my intention here is to find a way for us to solve this problem. My intention here is to make sure that you feel heard and validated. My intention here is to not run into this problem again. Whatever it happens to be, make sure that you make that clear, and as you go through the conversation, step back into that space occasionally to make sure that you're still on track. So hopefully that gives you a couple ideas of how to handle these more difficult, heated conversations with loved ones. Let's move on to the reflection questions. Number 1, how well do you validate others before trying to solve problems? 2, how often do your emotions get the best of you during discussions? So that's all I've got for this video. Hopefully that gives you a few ideas on different ways to handle kind of these heated, more difficult conversations. Again, it all boils down to making sure that both people are in a neutral or at least not so heightened emotional state that they're able to communicate productively and find a solution. It really goes back to kind of getting to the underlying pieces, right? Remembering what you're there to do. You want to maintain this relationship, you want to keep it stronger. It's not about being right. It's not about, hey, I think this, you think this, you're wrong, let me prove it to you. It's about finding the right solution or making some headway or being able to share information in the context of a relationship, even though it may be difficult, and maintaining some of those underlying undercurrents of what makes the connection important. That's all I've got for this video. So as always, if you have any questions, comments, topics you want me to cover, put them down in the box below, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please take a second to subscribe, as it really helps out a lot. If you're looking for more content, there's all sorts of information over at howtohappy.com. And if you want something a little bit more condensed and concise, I've also written the book Mindscaping, which is essentially a framework for optimizing happiness. So we'll have the link there as well. And that's all I've got. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.